Before we start, I just want to take a quick notice that Ms. Woods here. Thank you very much. Tom Wheels here from Cal City. Appreciate you folks being here. Lawrence Skidmore up there representing Vince Fong, our great assemblyman. Thank you for being here. Is anyone else I'm missing? Other than all of you are special, but I just wanted to say something about the New England Patriots for a moment. But we won't do that. We won't do that. So let's start off with a roll call. It's from the left.
Thank you, sir. Bob Page, County San Bernardino. Sorry.
Oh, from the left?
Yeah, yes, you.
Sorry.
My left.
Robert Pavelek, Branch Chief Resources, BLM.
Thanks, Robert.
You didn't use your speaker.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, Peter Brown, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Mick Gleason, Kern County.
Peggy Breeden, City of Ridgecrest.
Matt Kingsley, Inyo County.
Okay, we're going to start off with a pledge to allegiance. It's going to be led by Mr. Ron Kaczynski. He's going to start us off. Please remain standing for a moment of silent prayer or meditation.
Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, the way I'm reading this, we go to closed session early here, or are we doing that afterwards?
We'll go to closed session now. Yeah.
Okay, so we have item 3 is closed session, is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation. I need a vote to go to closed session.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we need to go to closed session.
What do we do?
Board reconvene. Let's have a board roll call from the left.
Commander Longbottom, United States Navy.
Robert Pavelek, BLM.
Bob Page, County San Bernardino.
Peter Brown, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Mick Gleason, Kern County.
Peggy Breeden, City of Ridgecrest.
And Matt Kingsley, Inyo County.
Thank you very much. County Council, can we have a report on items in closed session?
Sure. The board met on items 3A and 3B. There is no reportable action from the closed session other than there will be a committee of Mick and Peter that will meet with the large water users regarding fees in the next few weeks.
Thank you. We'll refine that as we move along. Brings us to item number 4, public comments. This item is reserved for members of the public to address the board on matters not on this agenda. No action may be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anybody wishing to make comment in public, now is your time. Please state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. Good morning.
I don't think your mic is on.
You got to get down close to it, Don.
Well, okay.
There you go.
You get too close, and that's not good either. Last meeting, towards the end of the meeting, there was a question and a little bit of discussion about the nature of domestic wells. How deep are they? I would have stood and said something at that time, but the meeting was already running long, so I didn't do that. But I'm going to give you a little bit of information that will help you understand why the domestic wells are the canaries in the coal mine, as we have pointed out over and over, and why many of them are in trouble right now. The standard drilling technique, the process for a domestic well in this valley and over much of the Southwest, is to give the customer 100 feet of standing water in the borehole after the well is bottomed out, 100 feet. When it's cased, it is typically typical to give the customer 2 20-foot sticks of perforation. That's 40 feet total. And so that means that there's 60 feet of water above the perforation, the start of perforation. It is not good practice to locate the pump in the perforation zone because it immediately leads to sand production and erosion of the casing. So you have 60 feet above that, that's your water zone that you can actually hang your pump in. You also need to keep the pump and motor submerged. 10 feet over the top of it is kind of a minimum. It really should be more than that. But let's say it's 10 feet. So 10 off of 60 gives us 50 feet now of water. That is the life of the well. And if you had a decreasing water level of a foot per year, that gives the customer nominally 50 years of life, which is probably longer than the casing will last back in the days of steel casing. But if the water level were dropping 1.5 feet per year, if the water level were dropping 1.5 feet per year, as it is over most of the Southwest and up north on Brown Road, now we have 33 years of life, and for which you have paid $20-some-odd thousand. Most of the wells in the valley were drilled some time ago, so they're well on the way of using up their 33 feet, and a lot of them have gotten to the point where they have either been deepened, if that's actually possible, or re-drilled. So the majority of the domestic wells in the valley are older and are literally at the last of their 33 feet or have actually gone through that. That's what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you, sir. Perfect timing.
Any questions you can ask me later.
Thank you very much, Don. Appreciate it.
Judy Decker. I'll be real short. In order to have a successful groundwater management program here, you have to avail yourself of the most competent technical people you can find. You have in this valley an unusually large amount of technically trained people, not just engineers, hydrologists, and geologists, but also physicists. And I would strongly recommend that you add physics to your requirements for your water management and also your technical advisory committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Decker.
Good morning. I'm Mayor Jennifer Wood from the City of California City, and I want to thank you, Supervisor Gleason, and Mayor Peggy Breeden and your esteemed board for the opportunity to talk to you today and also learn a little bit about this process because we'll be entering into it fairly soon. We're here today to restate our commitment to the to be good stewards of our precious water resources. And we also have concerns that there are entities within the Fremont Valley Basin that claim to have water rights and may well have those rights. But they want to sell that water. We have concern. While we understand that no action has been taken, no consideration by your particular board of directors to accept water from the Fremont Valley Basin, before any water can move from that basin at all, we need to be ensured that we know what the true recharge and the amount that we are going to find is a safe yield. In a December 2013 letter to the Kern County Board of Supervisors, a draft EIR on that basin said the recharge rate was between 15 and 17,000 acre-feet a year. That was when we were in the throes of a drought. If true, the sale of 10,000 acre-feet of water would leave the basin with a net recharge rate of 5 to 7 acre-feet. In a moment, you're going to hear from my city manager, Tom Wheel, about our efforts. But while we've done what we can to be good stewards of the water, and while we use tertiary water in our lake and to water our fairways and the golf course, we are also seeing new growth in our community and new uses for water. So we will also want to be good neighbors in the time of need for your communities out here. However, it's for the benefit of all of the stakeholders in the region that we need to know the facts concerning the safe yield and the true recharge. Just this morning in the Maddie Daily, I read that Kern County is almost out of a drought. While this is potentially great news, we must also continue to use, our water resources wisely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we look forward to working with you and all of us being great stewards.
We look forward to working with you also.
Thank you,
very much.
Supervisor Gleason, Mayor Breeden, Board of Directors, Tom Wheels, City Manager for the City of California City. Just want to give you a little update on where we're at with the Fremont Basin on that as far as our activities. We are truthfully your neighbors to the southwest of you. Our surface area of the basin is about 523 miles, of which Cal City composes about 203 of those miles. We have, it was actually as what Mayor Wood mentioned to you, the 2013 issue with Aqua Helio about the water extraction that sort of galvanized our group to come together. And in 2014, we formed a MOU between the major water agencies within that area, and that being California City, Mojave Public Utilities District, and as well as the Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency. The plan, we've been working on our IRWIMP, our Integrated Regional Water Management Plan activities, holding stakeholder meetings over the last year and a half. And we were able to put in a grant for the planning grant under the Prop 1B funding because we're one of three, I think, in the entire state of California basins that haven't had an IRWIMP actually formulated yet. And so we were successful in getting an award this year. $841,000 will be used to form the IRWIMP plan. And then, of course, the salt nutrient plan and the groundwater sustainability management plan. Even though we are a low priority basin, we will move forward rapidly to become similar to you, a groundwater sustainability management group. And with our goals being, of course, groundwater management and, of course, determining the safe yield, as Mayor Wood said, for future development of our region. And so we look forward to coming today to learn a little bit about the activities, and we'll stay abreast and watch you as you grow and hopefully learn, hopefully not from your mistakes, but for your successes as you move forward in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Renee Westelusk. I live within Ridgecrest city limits. I wanted to talk about two things. One is this letter that was in the packet regarding funding for the IWVGA. I'm asking the chair to consider hiring a consultant that could do the research before you have any meetings, so you'd have data to work with before you decided whether you wanted to do public meetings or ad hoc committee or both. It's a suggestion. And then I also attended a scoping meeting regarding an environmental impact report notice of preparation that's going to be done by the County Planning and Natural Resources Department regarding whether Kern County will ban medical and recreational marijuana activities except what is allowed by Prop 64, or whether they will do a plan where they would allow commercial marijuana cultivation and commercial marijuana processing, packaging, etc., for mobile delivery. I just think what I got out of the meeting was that there's going to be not just one set of rules for the whole county. It'll be done, I was told, by region. And so because we're in a different water basin than the western side of the county or California City, there would be flexibility in what, if they go ahead with commercial cultivation, etc. And they will also take into consideration our air basin, because there is pollution from cultivation and growing, etc., odors. And I want the IWVGA to stay informed about this EIR and its ramifications for our valley, and possibly if they could help shape the policy for our valley regarding if marijuana is going to be allowed to be cultivated and commercially sold, packaged, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Good morning. Mike Neal. Observing the long amount of time in the closed session this morning, I suggest that you follow the Water District's example and have your closed session meetings after this meeting, so that you can begin the meeting and not have 50, 60 members of the public sitting around waiting on that to begin. I don't think that will do anything to change the length of time you're going to have to spend in both meetings, but it will save a lot of man hours here waiting around for things to begin. So Water District gives a good example on that one. I think you should follow that.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. I agree. Anyone else? Okay, let's close public presentations and public comments and go to special presentations, kicked off by Mr. Parker.
Good morning, Board. How about those Patriots? I know that would resound with you. So I've got a couple of things to report on in terms of technical information. The Brackish Water Resources Partnership met yesterday, and just want to say that a few of us were given a briefing on COSO geothermal plant. That was very interesting. There's a lot of good things going up there. And then we discussed SkyTem, which is the aerial electromagnetics. And there's still a plan on this partnership to move forward with aerial geophysics or electromagnetic survey focused on delineation of brackish water resources and providing some hydrogeologic profiling in areas of the basin with sparse data. The partnership decided we need to refine the proposed flight line to include better coverage of well lithologic and geophysical log coverage. So we're in the process of compiling that available well information from public and private partners into a GIS database, which we'll review the progress on next month and start looking at a refined flight line for SkyTem. Another thing we discussed was addressing data gaps in the Southwest Basin portion, and we're going to be reaching out to the BLM, who has some wells down there, so just a heads up. And then a data management system. One of the requirements under SIGMA, the partnership, is to develop a data management system, and so the partnership developed a preliminary scope for data management system, and the GIS for the well information is the first step in building that DMS, and that will require funding and may require a formal bidding process depending on the source of the funding. The USGS Recharge Study began discussions with the USGS actually in February 2015 and had some briefings in the middle of 2015, and a grant scope was developed and submitted in December 2015. We received that grant in mid-2016, received a grant contract mid-November in 2016, is going to the Kern County Board for signatory in second week in March. And then on the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee met yesterday, and there was a SkyTem update, which I've already covered. CB well drilling update. The Navy still plans to get started sometime mid to late spring to drill some monitoring wells at locations prioritized by the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group, TAC. And then there was a discussion about the process and where things are at with the TAC for the GSA, and we're just kind of waiting to see what goes on with the charter on that one. I submitted, or as part of the package, there's a legislative and policy update, and this has links. I'm going to just hit a few high points in that, but it's really an educational piece, informational piece for the board and the public. It covers a number of things, and the best management practices, I would just point out that a couple of things that DWR is still working on is establishing sustainable management criteria. So that's how you set and determine the significant and unreasonable and desirable results. The metrics you set, the measurable objectives, minimum thresholds, that's going to be a guidance that DWR comes out with. Engagement or stakeholder engagement and communications is another piece that's guidance that's in development. The groundwater sustainability plan regulations. There were 24 alternative GSPs submitted. And what the relevance of that is that now there's some plans out there basically that we can look at. and determine what kind of content there is in it. And then after those plans are reviewed, that'll kind of set the bar for what DWR is going to be willing to accept. So something to keep our eye on. There was an online webinar on GSA formation that's available online. Water available for groundwater replenishment. It's a report that DWR published and is available online, and that includes estimates of what amounts of water are available for replenishment in different hydrologic regions in the state. So it's an interesting metric that has a piece in this basin as well. The Prop 1 Sigma funding, as far as I know, it's still on track to have a draft proposal solicitation package come out in the spring, and then actual submittals in the summer, and that's for groundwater sustainability plan funding. And then just a couple other things real quick. California Water Commission, they released their California Water Action Plan 2016 implementation report, which lays out kind of what's occurred with the commission, and also they have an overview of their ongoing activities. State Water Resources Control Board report to the legislature on the feasibility of using recycled water was released as well. That's potable reuse, direct potable reuse, and they're saying basically the result of that was they're still looking at 10 to 20 years down the road, but it's something that they were required to look at. Just a couple more things, and that's the state legislature. There's dates on what's going on with bills this year and how the legislature is going to move forward, including the last day to introduce bills was February 17th. And I'll talk about just a couple of bills, but I wanted to point out that this is the beginning of a 2-year session. There were new water committees formed, new chairs, because the previous chairs had been termed out. So that's going to be an interesting process to see how they move things forward. They recently had a hearing, I think it was day before yesterday, on the Cal Water Fix, which is the governor's project for the 2 tunnels. And I haven't had a chance to look at that, but certainly it's one that's going to be receive a lot of input. If you weren't aware, the EIR was completed on that at the end of the year, last year. So the administration's position is they can move forward with that now. The legislature is having hearings on it to discuss how that's going to happen. And then there's another hearing on February 28th on that particular proposal. 2 bills I want to point out, and this really relates to funding. SB 5 De Leon and then AB 18 Garcia, they're both bonds. They don't have a lot of water in them, but they do have some water in them. And here we are at the end of a drought, apparently, but groundwater continues to be and has been greatly depleted because of that drought. So one of the things that I'd suggest that is important to consider moving forward is to weigh in to the legislature on those 2 bonds, to bring that to their attention and consider getting some funding for water and groundwater projects moving forward. And so just a thought for this board to consider that I know I'm involved with another number of organizations that will be having dialogues with the legislature on those issues moving forward. And I'll close there and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Grab a seat and maybe the public has something for you. Anybody in the public wishing to make comment on the report, please come forward. Will there be anybody else? Okay.
Donna Thomas, 8158 Panorama Trail in Yokern. I just wanted to ask, what is the SB 193 spot bill for Sigma? Can you give any more details on that?
Mr. Parker.
Well, that's a process that legislators do. Basically, you have a due date, I think it was February 17th. I'd have to go back and look, but that's when all the bills have to be on file. And so basically it's filler language. We don't know what the actual language is. That'll get modified. So they call that a spot bill. It's a holder. So that's one to keep your eye on because it does reference Sigma. There were 2 spot bills that actually reference the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So those appear to be groundwater related and may have some, it's just worth following to see what that bill looks like. It'll change in the coming months.
Thank you, sir. Do we need a vote?
We do not. It's just receive and file.
Okay. Any board members have comments? Bob. Ms. Page.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering if I could ask that in the future when we get these kind of reports, if there's more focus on how the activities in the basin that Mr. Parker provides, how they specifically impact decisions this board will have to make in the future. I appreciate understanding what's happening in the basin, but I think that piece has been missing from the presentations in terms of how this relates to decisions we'll make in the future. And one of the specific things that Tim said today that did cause me to wonder how this is progressing is he mentioned work on preparing for the USGS study, which Kern County received the grant, the Stress County grant, which is supposed to finance that. So I didn't pick up on who was discussing how that gets set up, because I would assume that would be something that Kern County would work with this body on getting that set up. So I mean, those kind of things where he mentioned that, I'm like, okay, well, why isn't this board discussing getting that set up?
Thank you, Mr. Page. I had the same thoughts, and for me, it wasn't that issue. It was about outreach that we were talking about, that we need to have a better handle on exactly how these issues that we hear about today are going to impact our outreach, which almost is we're not doing a very good job at. We got to make some significant improvements on. So, Mr. Parker, that's for you for action to make your presentations such a way that gives us food for thought and room for action. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Page. Anyone else? I need a motion to receive and file.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, brings us to item number 6, consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda that's approve the meeting minutes of January 19th, 2017. Is anyone in the public wishing to comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any member of the board wishing to comment on the consent agenda?
Yeah, just one correction on paragraph 3, or page 3, first paragraph. I approved my own motion, so I don't think I can do that. I think it's just I think it was Peggy Breeden. It's supposed to be there. It says Peter Brown makes the motion, Vice Brown approved it. So I'd like to have that much power, but I don't have it.
Well, let's make that change. Thank you very much. Ms. Christensen, you got that?
I do.
Thank you very much. All in favor of I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I still move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Brings to item 7, discussion action to approve bylaws for the IWVGA. I think, Mr. Hall, you're going to lead us in that conversation.
We have the PowerPoint ready.
If we could pull up the PowerPoint.
Okay, so let's begin with these bylaws that are now before you. They've been thoroughly reviewed by all of the member agencies. We've got much of a consensus here we can get so far. I should say that's staff level at the member agencies. The board members, alternates, were not involved aside from our ad hoc committee. So let's go through this. This is our slides. So the bylaws are their equivalent of an administrative code for the Groundwater Authority. Some people think of bylaws as a corporation bylaws. These are completely different. They're administrative code. They're set up in chapters, sections, so that we can add as we need, bring new policies in as we need, remove things in a productive manner with simple resolutions that don't get into the entire set of bylaws, but also have a document that encompasses all of the policies and procedures, at least at a fairly high level and in many ways a detailed level of what the board will be doing and what the agency will be doing. As I said, they're codified for easy reference. So what was our goals? We need to meet today's goals. These bylaws, we'll talk about in a minute. There are other things in the bylaws that are reserved, as you'll notice if you've looked at them. Our basic goals right now were to meet the basic administrative requirements of the agency to get us up and running, get the first couple rungs of the ladder underneath us before we get up to the higher rungs. So we've got meeting structures in these. We've set up the committee structure. The TAC structure is reserved. We'll talk about that probably at the next meeting and set it up. The PAC is handled in this one. It sets up how we will be handling the public records of the agency. Budget rules are incorporated in this. And frankly, part of the goal here was to get this out to the public and get the first set of bylaws out so that we can start commenting and working our way through them. So, are the bylaws complete? That's probably one of the first questions we'll get, and the answer to that is simply yes and no. As I was saying, these are the first part of the bylaws. They take care of the administration, the real basic administration of the agency right now. Other things may or may not be added, and we've reserved places for them. A perfect example of this is Article 12 is an investment policy. This board will never need an investment policy if it keeps its fund in Kern County, Inyo County, or San Bernardino Treasury. That's the way governments function. If you keep them at the county treasury, you don't have an investment policy because that treasury invests them for you. If you pull them out and you start handling them separately from the county treasury, then you need an investment policy. Whether or not we will have one is a policy choice for future endeavors. So do the bylaws encourage public participation? Yes, they absolutely do. That was one of our primary goals here. We've set up a committee structure that is broad participation with multiple avenues of public review and input. The PAC in particular, we at one point in time thought about naming it the Water Users Committee because it's really what it is at this stage. It's a committee of those that are major water users in the basin. But because PAC was already out there, we left it at the PAC. The bylaws encourage and require public meetings, including our standing committees. So I don't think there's any much more to say about that other than they're definitely encouraging public participation. So I was mentioning the bylaws they established and they set forth the Policy Advisory Committee. I know we've talked about that in previous meetings. And while we've had some more, less than formal is probably not a best way of putting it, but we've had some agreement on what should be in that Policy Advisory Committee and what it's going to look like. We still hadn't finalized it until we stick it into the bylaws, and that's what we're doing today. It has been established, as the bylaws say, to advise the board on the development and implementation of the GSP, which is, frankly, the only reason why this agency exists, is to implement and adopt a GSP. And with that, any questions?
Any questions from the board before we begin? Yes.
Mr. Chair, in November when the board approved the structure for the Policy Advisory Committee, there was discussion about identifying specific entities sitting in certain seats. And I was just hopeful that you would indulge to have staff explain why the bylaws still just has the categories and doesn't specifically name those.
Great idea. Thank you very much.
Sure. I'm bringing up the section right now. So I think...
For a second. Was that your sole question? Would that be better answered as you go through the bylaws, or do you want to hit that one right now?
I think we should just hit that one now.
Okay, go for it.
So to answer your question, I think those entities still are named, although not in exactly those words of their name in here. For all intents and purposes, they are named. As example, the only wholesaler and industrial user of water that I know of in the basin is Searles Valley Mineral. And we've titled these with descriptions because others have descriptions. We have 2 representatives as domestic well owners. So it's sort of a counterbalance. 2 large ag, I think the only 2 large ag that we have that would fit the description that we've set out for large ag is Mojave and Meadowbrook. So the bylaws categorize them. They will be placed into the charter by name, and they will come forward to you with an application process because you're going to need to place a human being in the seat. So that's it. They're named without being named, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Thanks. We may have some more questions about that as we move forward. But any other questions from the board about the intro to the bylaws, the overview of the bylaws?
We're not talking about specific ones, but just the intro.
Just the intro.
Okay. No.
Okay, so we're done with the intro. Mr. Hall, you want to continue on with the discussion of the bylaws?
Sure. One other thing that came out previously is there had been discussion of having The GSA board members on the PAC, that is not provided for in the Brown Act. We can't do that. We run into a Brown Act problem if the GSA board members are on it. It's a notice and agendized problem. So while some have thought that was where we were going to go, we cannot. Now, that doesn't mean that the PAC isn't going to have direct input and ability to talk to the board. They're going to have that. We've got the water district on there as a water user. They're going to be the liaison directly to the board. And the board members or their representatives are going to be able to set in, and we presume would be setting in on PAC meetings. They're just not going to be part of the PAC and part of the active negotiations or discussions, whichever.
Did you want to continue talking about bylaws, or you want us to have a stop there and have a conversation about that?
I think that's it.
Okay, let's have a broad conversation about that issue. Because, go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, when I first saw that, I thought it was kind of weird because we've been talking about all of us being on all these committees, and but I guess the legal part of it is because the three of us, us three, have a weighted vote or whatever you want to call it. Apparently, if we all meet in another meeting, or we even have a representative, like we want to have our general manager be our representative, then that constitutes a potential conflict of interest or a majority or some kind of a serial meeting thing. And I'm not an attorney, so I won't explain it correctly. So I guess I agree with the logic. If it can be construed as that or viewed as that, then it's better safe than not. I am happy, though, that we're still on there because definitely the Water District wants to be involved in any of those talks.
Mr. Page.
Yeah, I was hoping, the Chair, if you could maybe ask Council to clarify the serial meeting issue that Director Brown just brought up, so it's more clear to the public what that potential issue is.
Thanks, sir. Hold on before we get there. Any other questions about? Okay, go for it.
Let me also comment on something I was hearing from Peter and make sure everybody understands this. The GSA board is the one that will be really ultimately responsible for an adopted GSP, which means 3 people up here are going to be, well, it's actually 4, will be adopting the GSP. If you're all on the PAC, whether it be 17 members, 15 members, 20 members, if it gets down to it, it would only be whose 4 votes mattered. So by pulling you off of the PAC, we're also empowering the PAC. We're getting more clear, definitive public participation. We're getting the public a chance to be unfettered and really get out their opinion without it going through discussions by those that will really, in the end, control the vote. The serial meeting issue is also a problem. Some had suggested that what we should do is appoint people that were not on the board of directors of the GSA to the PAC board. The problem with that is, let's say, for example, Alan is appointed by Kern County. Alan would then be in a PAC board discussing policy issues and presenting Kern County's positions on it, unable to talk to Mick. Because if he did, and he goes down there and he talks, and then Peter has Dawn in that meeting, and Peter's talking to Dawn, and Peggy has somebody in that meeting, those 3 meeting together create a hub and spoke serial meeting problem. That's the legal issue. Now, on top of that, there's always the issue of, do you want staff in front of your policy decision makers, which is what you would also be doing. So it's a legal and a practical. The legal one exists, but frankly, the practical is bad, if not worse, than the legal issue.
Mr. Lemieux. Mr. Lemieux.
Yeah, what Phil's saying is correct, but I think I know there's a lot of confusion about the Brown Act issue, and it's something that's important to me. So I want to give a little bit of a deep dive into this for a second, just so everyone's clear what we're talking about. And first off, the Brown Act is the rules that require meetings take place in an open and public fashion, and that means that the public has to be granted access to meetings of the board. It also means that the public has to be properly noticed about what's going to take place at those meetings before they happen. in this particular case, there's two levels of Brown Act problem with us being on that particular PAC committee, and I think they're getting a little muddled together. So I want to make it clear because it gets a little confusing. The first issue has to do with the agenda, and that issue is this: if you have a legislative body like the one we have here, or like the City Council, and they create a committee, then the Attorney General has given the opinion that committee can only consist of two, or I should say not a quorum. In the case of the City Council, it would be two board members on the committee. If you have three, you've got a quorum. That's a majority of the board. And the reason that they say you can't have a majority or a quorum of the board on the committee is because that would mean that when the committee met and discussed something, you'd have a majority of the City Council board, a majority of our board here discussing it, and it would actually, in fact, be a meeting of the City Council. Because the way the Brown Act defines meetings, if you've got, anytime you've got a quorum of a legislative body together in one place, whether it's here or over at the restaurant, it's considered a meeting. So they're saying the AG opinion is you've agendized this as a committee meeting. That means you can't have a majority there, or it's actually a meeting of the board. So the first layer of problem with the PAC was if we had all of our board members present as originally contemplated on the PAC, we'd actually be having meetings of the board, not meetings of the PAC, and that would be a no-no. So that's level problem number one. So then the question was, well, can we go back and appoint other people besides the board members, and they'll represent the members of the board? Can we do that? Well, the problem with that is, and this gets to what Phil was just describing, as I mentioned, anytime you have a majority or quorum of the board discussing an item, you've got a meeting, no matter where that happens. It also is the case that that's true no matter how that happens. If that happens on the phone, it's a meeting on the phone. If that happens, on the internet, it's a meeting on the internet. The AG has also said that you can't use intermediaries to have that meeting. In other words, if I talk to Phil and then if I talk to Peggy and then I talk to Phil about what I talked to Peggy about, and he talks to Mick, and if that eventually results in a quorum of the board sort of chained into that conversation, you have a meeting. It's a serial meeting. So what this causes is the problem of, if we've got representatives on that PAC meeting, they can't talk to anybody else. They can't, because we don't know at that point if we're going to end up with a Brown Act violation or not. If they go talk their representative, they don't know who else has talked to whom, and so it's important from my perspective, and I think the whole board's perspective, to not only not have a violation of the Brown Act, but not put ourselves in the position where we might have one accidentally, and we certainly don't want to do anything that would convey the impression that we could have a Brown Act violation. So for those reasons, we've recommended against that.
Mr. Lemieux, what is the consequences of a Brown Act violation?
Favorite topic around the city sometimes. The consequences are that if an action is taken illegally, then that action can be undone. Then what the cure is essentially is you have to go back and take it at a proper meeting.
Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I should add that if you do commit a Brown Act violation, there's sort of one of those juicy items for an attorney because it's a pretty simple lawsuit. There's not much cost involved in bringing it, and if you win it, you get attorney's fees. So
let's not advertise for lawsuits. You're also going to face some really mean attorneys on the other side.
But you see, our point here is that I don't really feel like going swimming with sharks while throwing chum in the water. So we're being very cautious. Frankly, we're not being cautious on this. This is a straight out issue. We've got AG opinion. I've got the supports that. But when we are talking Brown Act with this body, should keep in mind that we are cautious as attorneys with Brown Act violations because there's attorney's fees involved. And it's a simple lawsuit to bring, and it will muddle up everything that we have in litigation while we're on a very short time frame.
I forgot one other point to make at the end, and that is that I've been asked sometimes, why the water district and not the city, or why the water district and not the counties. So as I mentioned, the principle is that we can't have a quorum be on the committee. So it's got to be, somebody's going to have to be the board's representative The compromise was reached that it would be the water district, in part because the water district is the one with the most skin in the game. They're a water user, as Phil mentioned. And so the water district and also the Navy would be serving as our sort of go-betweens or representatives between the board and the PAC. And then if in the event that we need to have a joint meeting, we can always have a joint meeting.
You both have convinced me that I'm thrilled that I'm not a lawyer. Mr. Page.
Mr. Chair, I was wondering, based on that description of the Brown Act challenges and the recommendation, at the beginning of the presentation, Mr. Hall made the statement that these proposed bylaws, recommended bylaws, were developed by consensus of the member agencies. And so I just wanted to be clear that San Bernardino County did not participate in those for the specific reason that was just discussed. I've got opinion from my counsel that as the alternate on this board, I should not be participating in those staff discussions, and that those staff discussions happen with the committees that this body has established to reach those decisions. And if there's anything else I left out in terms of how staff's ensuring that they're not violating the Brown Act when they develop this proposal, I would be interested to hear that.
Thank you, Mr. Page.
Yeah, I should address that just so people out there understand. San Bernardino does not have a staffer beyond their alternate that's on the board. So San Bernardino has not been involved in pretty much any of our discussions since the GSA has been formed at our staff level. At staff level, we have the attorneys, staff, Alan, Don, Dennis. That's the staff we're having in these discussions. So that no alternates are being involved in those discussions. And if they are, we never reach the point of having a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Now, your review of the bylaws is complete?
Yes.
And the way forward now is, what is the procedure now for how we're going to approve these bylaws? Could you go through that, review that, please?
Well, if the board doesn't have any more comments, we should open up for the public discussion.
Keep going as to, we open the public, then it comes back to the board, and the thinking is, how's that going to happen?
Okay. Yes. So today what we'll do is we will board discussion, public discussion, response to comments. We've got a resolution in the packet right now. There's been a slight change in the resolution language. What will happen from here forward is these bylaws will not become effective until the end of the March meeting of this board. We've put that in to ensure and make 110% positive assurance that any member agency that would like to comment on the bylaws at their board level has that opportunity. So to just put an example on it, if the water district has a complaint or a problem with the way these bylaws are drafted after your board votes on them today, they will have time to review them and make comment, and we will put it on the agenda in March to address their comment if they so wish.
And the public will have an opportunity to comment today.
Yes.
And then after today, when the water district meets or the Kern County meets or the city meets, they will have another opportunity to comment. And then if that body decides they want to raise an issue or to change part of the bylaws, they agendize that item, and we have a public conversation again about that change.
That is exactly the process. And if we did have public comment in March and a possible change, the GSA would be acting, and the members of the public who show up here would have time to comment again.
Thank you. Mr. Page.
Yeah, sorry. I had one last question just to clarify for myself and for the public. As Phil mentioned, this covers, he said yes and no in terms of whether this is complete. If there are certain things that aren't in this document, this administrative bylaws, but they're in the JPA agreement that all the parties approved and entered into, I'm assuming that the JPA agreement itself would be the ruling document. If there's omissions in the bylaws, but they're in the agreement, we go to the agreement for instructions on how to do that. So, for example, the bylaws does not have an article regarding definitions, but our JPA agreement does. So if there are terms used in this bylaws that someone might wonder what does that mean, they would need to go to the agreement to see what our definition of that term is.
Mr. Hall.
That is correct. At some point in time, and I'm not exactly sure how thinking back how it went down. We had talked about putting definitions in here, and we didn't because we're using the definitions from the JPA document, or we're defining them with a quotation mark in this document rather than a definition section. There are certain things inside the JPA that are taken word for word in this document. And it's just simply so that somebody at a staff level 5 years from now can run in and say, oh, it's in the bylaws right here. We're going to have to look at both documents. In another instance, the voting description in here is much more simplified from what is in the bylaws. That was just really for space. We know the JPA document itself is the constitution for this agency. This is more like legislative code, and it will have to give way to the Constitution. So,
any further comments from board members before we go to the public?
I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
Not a question. I, for one, am happy to get the bylaws done, and the main reason is to get this policy advisory committee organized and ready to be able to help advise this board. And I'll just say that I think it's important that we get that committee started so that we can start to hear from the public and from in this case, water users and the people that are going to be most affected in a different format than the 3 or 5 minutes that you get to address us up here, where oftentimes it's not an agenda item that we can necessarily have a great conversation with. So people can argue about whether this is exactly the right people or organizations, or whether we've listed them in the right way. That might be true, and there's a lot of legal issues with how we organize this committee, and I appreciate the legal advice, but I'll just say as a board member, what I want to do is I want to have that committee organized so that we can start to hear from that committee as we contemplate a plan. And I'm happy that we're at the point where we can, a month from now, or at our next meeting, have that task done.
Nice comment. Well stated, Mr. Hall.
I probably should say one other thing. There's nothing magical about bylaws and how we adopt them or change them. I mean, at the next meeting, changing the bylaws is a very simple process. You just motion, resolution, and we change that section. It's one of the reasons why we've adopted them this way is by codifying them this way, it's very easy. So as example, let's say, well, here's a prime example, Section 5.8, the Technical Advisory Committee membership. I'm sure at the next meeting, or at least we're hoping at the next meeting, we'll be establishing what that Technical Advisory Committee membership will be. We do not have to open up the whole bylaws. We will just have a simple resolution that says Section 5.8 of the bylaws is changed to include this, and that's it. There's no length of time period. I understand some people have thought maybe it was a longer process for adopting bylaws because they had the term bylaws. There's nothing magical about them in that regard.
Thank you, sir. Any comments from the board? Okay, let's open to the public.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask the one Bob asked, so I won't. But I would like you to discuss 5.3, the standing committee membership. If you could talk to me about that, because it talks about, likewise, the board shall have the sole discretion to remove or admonish any member or members of any standing committee at any time. Could you explain the reason why that's there? Not that we want to get rid of somebody because we don't like you, but could you address that?
Sure. I think everybody should have enough trust in the board that we're not going to be removing people because we don't like them or we don't like their opinion. The real issue why it says sole discretion is so we're not arguing about whether or not somebody was sufficiently removed for cause. How is the cause defined? There's no real definition of cause unless we start writing 15-page document on what cause is. By just leaving it up to your discretion, the public has to have some faith in that you won't be removing somebody just because you don't like their opinion. I think you'd probably get a lot of backlash if you did. But by writing it this way, we don't have to worry about going into court and arguing whether or not cause was sufficient to remove somebody.
Is this in normal bylaws of every or of most entities?
I would say most bylaws and other things that I would write, I would always try to avoid using something like for cause, because that just opens up an argument.
Okay. All right. Did you want to say something, Keith? I thought I saw you there.
Yeah, it just and you have to understand that the process for removing somebody with cause, I mean, that means there'd have to be a finding of the board, which means we'd have to have some kind of hearing, which I assume would subject these people, people to potential embarrassment. I mean, so the idea is, if it's not working out, it's not working out, but we don't want to have a show trial about somebody's personality or something that's causing an issue.
Okay. The next one that I would like to talk about is 5.6, the membership. At some point in time, how do we say, when you're talking about removing up here and the advisory committee, is the person removed or is the entity removed?
Well, if you look at the way the committee structure is set up, this committee structure, it's just in the bylaws. You can always change it. So to say, could you remove an entity? You absolutely could, but that's not the way we were drafting this with the thought process on standing committee direction and earlier. It's really more of a person, because you always got to remember, even if you appoint an agency is an agency. It's not a human being. We need human beings in seats. So could there possibly be a situation where, for example, you removed a particular agency because they never showed up? Absolutely. And you can do that. Okay. But that wasn't the design or what we were after.
I wanted to keep it a positive way, and that's why I'm asking you the negative questions,
yes,
so you can address those. And I have one more. Okay.
You're not thinking of me on this whole removal thing, are you?
No, sir.
Okay.
Never. On the amendments, 14.1, the bylaws may be amended from time to time by resolution of the board. How does that happen?
Well, let's talk about the technical advisory committee membership. At our next meeting, we'll hopefully have a membership structure for that. At that stage, you will have a resolution in front of you that says this is our technical advisory committee membership. Section 5.8 of the bylaws will be in, is it 5.6? That's PAC. I'm talking TAC.
Oh, all right.
Well,
whichever section is for the TAC that we now have reserved, that section will be in the resolution saying it will now read as such. And then you take these bylaws, which are going to be in our file, and you add that section into 5.8. It's the same way you do administrative codes for your public agency, or in your case, your city. When you change your Muni code, you don't do the whole thing. You just change that one section. Same process.
How does that happen? Is it by a majority vote? Is it by a super vote? Is it because we've referred to those types of votes, and I'd like to know how that happens.
In this instance, it will be a majority vote with our super 3-vote structure included.
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Brown.
Just a quick question. So we didn't name anybody in here. We named entities, and I think I get that. We started that way, and then we went to names. After we adopt this, hopefully in March, how quickly do we name names? And we do that in a charter, I understand. How does that work? We get applications, and then we have another meeting, and then we adopt this charter that populates these positions?
I would hope in March, but I'm not certain because we might be reopening these in March. But I would hope in March that we would be well into the application process, and whether it be March or April, that the charter and the PAC is, faces are put to seats. I think would happen then.
Could I ask one more question? Yeah. Okay, so do we have an application right now that people can grab and start filling out so we can Or is that going to happen after we adopt these bylaws?
Through the chair, it's going to happen after we adopt the bylaws. We have a draft ready to go, and you'll get all the folks out here and everybody interested will get a notice when they're out on the website. We're going to have we hope to have an electronic, fill in the blank, email it to us. So we do paperless, or those that want to do paper, they can print it out.
So let me understand it. We possibly adopt or vote on these bylaws today. It itemizes or details the PAC membership in general format. Mm-hmm. People apply to those particular lines that they coordinate with. We review at the next meeting. We will. They'll be able to get those applications online or through other means that we're going to make sure that the whole public is aware of. We're going to review these applications. We make decisions based on the applications, who is a member, who joins, who doesn't join. We itemize those and we detail those specific members in the charter, which will become available also in March. Is that correct?
That's the hopeful timeline. I would press it to maybe April, depending on whether or not we reopen.
But let me ask you another question now. Okay, so let's say it stalls till April because everything seems to stall. But we take action today in these bylaws. But we have stuff we got to get going on quickly. Mm-hmm. So how do we start moving on things as soon as possible?
Maybe I can address that one.
Please do.
If you approve this item today, the bylaws, and it becomes effective, assuming it becomes effective in 30 days, give or take, on a parallel process, either tomorrow or Monday, we will have an application out online for people to submit their applications. So we're not doing this end to end, we're doing it parallel. At the next meeting, depending on how the applications go, we may have some applications to give to you that it says these are the persons that have applied. So that will not slow down the process of getting the PAC started. That's one thing.
I don't think so.
Okay. We get some other things to talk about, I'm sure, but let's get the public engaged. So let's open the public hearing, and anybody who would like to make comments on this item, now's your time. Could I have a raise of hands? How many people would like to comment on this? Could I just have a general count? Okay, good, beautiful. So I'd like to keep it under an hour if we could. So let's divvy up. We got maybe 20 people tops, 15 people. So you get to see 4 minutes, 5 minutes apiece. Try to be economical and efficient with your words. I'm getting dirty looks from other players here, but let's just get your point across. Please respect our time. Go ahead, Don.
Don Decker again. I think I heard the discussion that just went down that the PAC application and the charter development are going in parallel. If that is correct, how is it possible that somebody is going to give you an application to a position that is not well defined? What will be the duties of that person in this application they're submitting? That's a question. And in that regard, one of the things that many of us have pointed out is that in a typical employment situation, which admittedly this is not quite the same, but in a typical employment situation, the position has a set of very specific requirements for the position being offered. And there is some guidance offered both to the employer and to the potential employee as to the criteria that will be used in the selection process. And I submit to you that having that, especially the criteria for acceptance, it's almost an essential thing for you guys to have at your fingertips also. Otherwise, you end up with a a much more subjective choice process. Well, yes, I do indeed like him, as opposed to look at his resume and look at these qualifications that match up almost perfectly with what we really want. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. And please remember, we have several more items to do, so please keep your words.
Joshua Nugent. I'm here on behalf of Mojave Pistachios and Nugent Farms. We respectfully request that the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority accelerate efforts to establish and the proposed PAC and TAC, and that the authority's board of directors consider amendments to the draft bylaws concerning the membership and role of the PAC. The proposed PAC membership, as specified by the draft bylaws, is not ideal. The board should consider edits to the bylaws to render membership similar to that proposed and approved at the board's November meeting. Notably, the current draft bylaws provide 4 non-voting members of the JPA and 9 stakeholder voting members. The November PAC charter provided for each JPA member and each of the associate members would have a seat on the PAC authority. The prior composition is preferable. We understand that the purpose of the PAC is to be a venue in which all stakeholders, public and private, meet to develop consensus-based groundwater management. That will most likely occur if the JPA member agencies are present at the TAC. The draft bylaws should also be amended to provide a leadership role for the PAC in the development and implementation of the GSP. The bylaws presently state that the Water Resources Manager, quote, will be responsible for preparing and implementing the GSP, and that the, quote, Water Resource Manager will consult with policy advisory and TAC committees as directed by the board. This directive is substantially weakened from the November PAC charter, which stated, quote, the PAC is the primary policy advisory to the board, and that, quote, the PAC will guide GSP preparation and implementation with assistance from the TAC, a technical consultant, facilitator, and program manager. The bylaws should be amended to include language similar to the November charter language. Otherwise, as presently drafted, the PAC is advising the board on substantive matters of groundwater management could be usurped by the Water Resources Manager in preparing the GSP with mere consultation with the PAC. If the role of the PAC is to build consensus around groundwater management options, then the PAC should be placed squarely in the leadership role together with the Water Resource Manager in the development and implementation of the GSP. We respectfully urge the board to make these amendments to the draft bylaws and to approve charters for the PAC and TAC, together with membership in each committee at its March meeting. To date, items have been agendized on the board on substantive subjects, which should first have been vetted by stakeholder committees. Agenda item 7 on the January agenda concerning funding of the groundwater management is a prime example.
Excuse me, Mr. Nugent, your mic on?
Cut off.
Oh.
One last question. That's all in a letter for you guys to read as well. As far as the application process, what is the difference between large and small ag? Secondly, a question for everybody. Is there any legal structure where all the stakeholders could get together at a table and talk? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Derek Hoffman of Gresham Savage, legal counsel for Meadowbrook. We submitted a comment letter today as well. I'm sure you all have it in your packets. And I would ask you to carefully review that before taking any action on the bylaws today. And we raised a few issues in our letter, and I do appreciate the presentation that was given today and a lot of the discussion among the board about questions regarding the bylaws. I'm pleased to see the substantive discussion on the issues that have been raised, and so we thank the board for their attention to those questions. There was discussion about practical issues with regard to the PAC, and I want to speak a little bit to those briefly. The bylaws as proposed basically divorce several of the board member agencies from the PAC. And the problem with doing that is it removes a line of communication, a direct line to communicate in real time on important policy issues. And so that was the reason why we were pleased to see the November PAC membership, which was approved unanimously by the board at that meeting, include all the member agencies and all the stakeholders as well. And so we too would urge considering going to that structure that was previously approved in November by unanimous motion. The other thing I'd point out is, while I appreciate the discussion today on the issues, no legal issues were raised when the board previously approved and carried a motion to approve the PAC committee structure. Next is the naming issue. As we see in the bylaws, one of the differences between that and the structure that was approved by motion in November was the names of entities that would fill certain seats, specifically Meadowbrook, Mojave, and Searles. And we've heard discussion today about how easy it is to amend a bylaw. And so I just ask you today to, again, keep that consistent with what was previously approved and reaffix those names to those seats, the two large, agriculture and the industrial user, namely Meadowbrook, Mojave, and Searles. I appreciate the comments today that those will be named in the PAC charter, but it would be preferable to see that in the bylaws. And then finally, just more of a drafting comment, and this is very brief. We see in the records retention provision, there's no way in the bylaws specifically for committee members to get to records of the authority. It seems that they may have to go through Public Records Act requests to get there. And so that would be cumbersome. And so we'd simply ask you to take a look at that as we detailed in our letter. Thank you today for your attention and consideration of these issues.
Good morning. I'm Stan Rotora. I can't talk as fast as the previous gentleman. I have 14 comments. I'm only going to address 5 of them here right now, but I'll give the whole list to your recorder so that they might be part of the record. My first comment deals with the makeup of the General Counsel, paragraph 3.5. The description of the General Counsel is set up to encourage conflict of interest. Kern County has indicated it would like to stop funding the Groundwater Authority, even though it gets taxes each year to manage groundwater. Kern County may be the first agency sued by the Groundwater Agency. This represents a clear conflict of interest for the county attorney. I would like to see the whole makeup of the attorney development reviewed and clarified. My feeling is this should be an independent body, which means it needs independent counsel. Especially with the discussion of funding coming up, it's going to be a critical issue. Second comment, paragraph 3.5.1 acknowledges the possibility of a conflict of interest in the general counsel position. It goes on to state that a conflict of interest for this primary role is okay. It's not okay. It could lead to constant irritation, unknown out-of-pocket costs, and unreasonable schedule delays. Again, I would heartily suggest that one rethink the whole design of the legal counsel issue. Paragraph 3.7, or some paragraph dealing with finances should address the fact that a financial audit needs to be performed on a yearly basis. Next comment, suggests making the scope of the PAC in paragraph 5.5 any policy-related action. It is the Policy Advisory Committee. It's not just the GSP Advisory Committee. And my feeling is it needs to have a role in any policy issue. Many major policy decisions will be financial in nature that may or may not be considered within the scope of the GSP development or implementation. Next comment, although this was briefly touched on by the mayor, and I appreciate her comment, suggests deleting in paragraph 5.6 in 2 places where the board has the ability to control either the removal or the conduct of the PAC members. I'm not talking about the standing committee members. I'm talking specifically about the PAC members. The PAC members represent various special interest groups whose opinions may from time to time disagree with a majority of the board. That's okay. Nonetheless, the interests of all groups need to be represented without the threat of censure. All right? The people that are on the PAC are there for a reason to represent their interests. Last comment, paragraph 5.8, PAC membership is a critical element of the bylaws. It needs to be defined before the bylaws are approved. The TAC should be already in place and functioning. I heard a comment a little earlier saying we need these bylaws so we can get up and running. Well, we can't get up and running until we have a TAC. All right? We need to have the TAC. If we have to delay the bylaws to get them, that can be a driver for getting it done. But we really need to have the TAC up and running. And until it is, we're not really going to have a GSA. And I'll give this list to, who is the recorder here?
Dale. Oh. Thank you, sir.
Sophia Merck. I'm a public person. Speaking for myself, my address is 2062 South Mike Trail Road, Ridgecrest, California. I'm a water hauler, and, here I am. I have some concerns about the bylaws, and I'm not going to speak on each one. However, there is one that is kind of a major deal to me. Because of the distances of this board, some of the meetings are being held teleconferencing. And under teleconferencing, if it's not mentioned in the bylaws, under the Brown Act, it starts talking. An example of an action that Brown Act allows a board to perform, if it's in the bylaws, is to hold a meeting by teleconference. So maybe one of the inserts on your meetings should be teleconference. And then under that, they list 7 points in regards to how a teleconference is to be held and where the notices are to be placed, and the public is invited to be on those teleconference calls. And I will be sending a letter in the next 24 hours. And who do I address the letter to?
Peggy.
Pardon me? Thank you, Sam. Do I send it to Dale? Do I send it to...
Well, I think in the bylaws we have a headquarters now. We have a home
on the
base.
agenda, if I may. On the agenda, the mail goes to the Indian Wells Valley Water District, and you can address it to this agency, care of them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Is that a conflict of interest?
No, it's not.
Okay, just asking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Renee Westelusk. I'm a private citizen living in Ridgecrest city limits. I'm a member of the public. I just had a few questions, and I'd also like to be able to send in things that I think should be corrected or changed in the bylaws. But one of my things is today's resolution that you're going to adopt on the second page. There's a 1, 2, and then a 4, and there's no 3. I don't know why. Why is that?
Thank you. We'll correct that.
Okay, and then my other concerns have to do with there's no object section which states in one sentence the purpose of the GSA. I realize there's the Joint Exercise Powers Agreement where that's stated, but I still think it'd be better if it was stated in the bylaws. And I also think you need to have a section on membership, even though it is stated in the Joint Exercise Powers Agreement, because members of the public in the future or newcomers to our area that want to be involved in going to GSA meetings would like to know who are the members. And if they've got to flip through 2 different sets of documents to find that out, I just think I know it's redundant, but I think it should be put in there. And one of my concerns is, should there be an annual audit since this is a government agency? And I'll send the rest of my corrections in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westlaw.
Yes, I'm West Katzenstein, 1450 Sydenham Avenue in the county, domestic well owner. And I sense there's still a pushing and shoving going on in the philosophical role of the PAC. I hear folks saying they would like them they would like that they would see the PAC providing you with a plan based on consensus and perhaps dialoguing with you behind the scenes. I think, in my mind, it is your role to decide the plan. It will be the PAC's role to provide you alternatives, and that may not result in consensus. The PAC may bring forward to you 2 or 3 alternatives for you to consider or for you to ask your consultants to consider. So I don't like the idea. If I were sitting on the PAC as a private well owner, I would worry that lawyers would end up causing us to come up with a consensus, which there might not be a consensus, that might not suit the domestic well owners. So I think you should expect the PAC to provide you alternatives, different points of view. You folks make the decision as to what the GSP will be and what its direction will be. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gleason and board members. I heard earlier that the list for the PAC committee was changed, the names deleted, and we went back to descriptions, but that there was definitions given for large and small ag as well as the industrial user. I had asked that question at previous meetings. I was wondering if you could tell me when that definition was arrived at and what that definition is.
We'll do that soon, today,
Thank you.
before we end this meeting. Thank you.
Donna Thomas, Chairman and board members. I'd just like to ask that in the SGMA legislation itself, it lists specific lists of stakeholders to be represented in GSA groups. 2 of those are the disadvantaged communities and tribes. And I don't know with the casino project coming in and if there should be a designation for a tribal representative. And we do have disadvantaged communities within the boundaries, I'm sure. So perhaps those need to be addressed.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Judy Decker. I would like to say that 2 things. I think that you should bring the TAC forward at the same time that you bring the PAC forward. They go together. You have no requirements thus far for the TAC. My understanding is they are also part of the community. I believe it is a conflict of interest for the Water District to sit on the PAC committee. They are already represented right here on this board. So they will be represented. The PAC is supposed to, and the TAC are supposed to report to you as a board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Decker.
Good afternoon. Mike Neal. I'll start off by seconding what Ms. Decker said about the Water District being on the PAC board. I had not thought about that, but once I hear her statement, I do agree with that. One of the big ones also that I'll have to second is what Mr. Rotor brought up on sections 3.5, 3.51. I believe there's clear conflict of interest going on there, and that this board should have its own specific general counsel, not counsel to any of the other member agencies. Section 3.8 talks about water resources manager, and it says the authority shall hire a consultant or consultants, so forth and so on. What I don't see addressed there, it's just assumed but not clear, is who is the water resources manager's actual boss? Is that going to be the board itself, or is that going to be the board's, what are they calling him, general manager? Yes. Is it going to be a general manager? I think that definitely should be made very clear. In the case of city council, 2 positions are employees of the council itself. All other positions are basically employees of the city manager. So, who's the boss is important here. I noted what appears to be a discrepancy in meeting times called out in standing committees. Section 5.2 says that all standing committees, each standing committee will establish a time and place. Section 5.5 talks about policy advisory committee and calls it a standing committee, but says that the board will establish the time and place for PAC meetings. So there's a conflict there, and I think that's easily cleared up by taking out that last sentence in section 5.5. Make sure I didn't miss something here. They're a minor detail, but it's important at least to some of us who like to make these meetings informed, and that's in section 2.5 as far as the agenda. That this would like to see some specific language placed in there to make sure that it's denoted as to when the agenda is placed on the website for the public to have access to. We've had difficulties in the past at City Council, people not being able to get to this information. And in general, of course, Brown Act, that has to be out 3 days ahead of the meeting time. Personally, I've always would have liked to have it sooner than that, because especially when there's large amounts of content, you are going to need more time than that. And as the public is an important part of the meetings and the input, they need to see that. So, making sure that the people who are administratively putting this information out have instruction is important in that way also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal.
Dale Haletic, domestic well owner, and I live near North Brown Road in Yukon. I agree with the people who have spoken before me that it's probably your job, your first job, to establish criteria, what you're looking for in PAC members. And part of that criteria, of course, is relevant background, what you've done for the community, so forth, so forth. But I think the most important thing of any of the criteria is interest. Who comes to these meetings? Who's interested in our water situation? We see the same faces meeting after meeting, which is good, meeting after meeting, and it shows an interest either if you're representing yourself or organizations. That has to be important, because if you're going to see someone sending in an application that has not been part of all this, how are they going to keep up or catch up or whatever? So that's something. Also, the water resource manager, I agree. Is he or she going to be boss of the PAC? What is that relationship? And please explain that. And again, to answer any kind of an application, we need some sort of purpose, maybe better covered, more detailed on the PAC and what you're looking for in membership. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see no further comments, so we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Let's give you first swipe at that, Mr. Hall. You have some questions.
Sure.
3.5, 3.51, records access.
I'll kind of go through them here in order what I jotted down. So first, to answer Mr. Nugent's concerns, I don't think that the PAC committee, even with the water resource manager, has really changed. I think it's always been kind of contemplated, and what's been out there is that the PAC will get together, they will meet, they will be a water resource manager. In this case, the prior charter had a project manager, a facilitator, and somebody else listed. We've now got a water resource manager instead. They'll meet with him, and they will come up with the plan. They will work together to come up with the plan. At the end of the day, we need to have one person, though, who's going to be moving the plan forward. If we get questions from DWR, we need one person, not 19 people, answering those questions. So the water resource manager is not a diminishment of the PAC. It's just a point person for the PAC that moving forward with the GSP. I think that should really be clear, and everybody should understand that. We're not diminishing the PAC at all by having a water resource manager. Frankly, 19 people can't get together to draft one document and then defend the document at DWR or wherever we have to. The next thing we've got, it's further down, but I'll address it now. Some also have asked who his boss would be, the water resource manager. Water resource manager's boss is this board. He's going to be an outside consultant. He's going to be hired, and he's going to serve at the pleasure of this board, just like your attorneys do. He's not going to. Some people might be confusing that process with many other public agencies. A lot of code sections will say, for example, in a water district that the general manager is in charge of hiring and firing employees. The water resource manager is not an employee of this agency, nor do we have that statute requiring our general manager to be the one hiring and firing. In this case, the water resource manager will be an outside consultant who will not be an employee of the agency and will serve at the pleasure of the board. So we'll move on to Mr. Hoffman. First, Mr. Hoffman's concern about the too large being listed in the bylaws versus spelling names out. I think it's really appropriate to leave it just as general names, or I should say general categories. First, everybody else is a category, so why should these two entities be treated differently? Second, what happens if one of these entities buys out the other? Or they split off into now, Mojave Pistachio becomes Mojave Pistachio and Mojave Almonds or something. You start running into issues there, which we can address more easily through the charter, through the appointment process. And remember, at the end of the day, we have to appoint individuals to those positions. There's also been concerns about what's the definition of large ag, small ag, et cetera. They're not dealt with in these bylaws. If the board would like to define those now, they can. I don't know that you really need to, though. You might want to wait until you get the applications in, because the applications are going to say, I have a farm of X size. And you could then manipulate and deal with the issue of, let's say you have one that's 80 and one that's 40 and two that are a couple thousand. Is the 80 too big to be small ag because we chose 60 as a number? Those are things to think about. Flexibility there is probably better than rigidity. Next thing, the records. I'm kind of confused about this comment because it's a suggestion that this board is not going to provide these very important committees the records they need to operate. I'm sort of confused by that. I do know in his letter that he made comment that the way the comments were written in their letter that they wanted larger access to records. Well, being an attorney, looking at that with my attorney eye, that looks like he wants to be able to get into records that would otherwise be exempt from public access. Now, the Public Records Act requires almost everything we do to be out and open for the public. When records are exempt, there's a very good reason for it. Does Meadowbrook need access to employee files? Does Meadowbrook need access to files that are legally privileged? No, and those are what's exempt from the Public Records Act. To take that further, if there is a record that is exempt for some reason, and we would not have to hand it out, but we hand it out to one individual, we lose that exemption on that record forever. You cannot pick and choose who you give a record to. So while I understand the concern at one level that the PAC needs to be able to get records to do what it wants to do, I don't understand why there's an implication that this board wouldn't provide them all the records they need. Moving forward, so now we get to Mr. Rotora. He's made a point about attorney conflict of interest, and at one level I understand that, but I should remind everybody that at the end of the day, the 5 public agencies up here are responsible and liable for the actions of this GSA. And as such, your attorney, whether it be me representing the county and putting my 2 cents in as the county, or me being general counsel for this GSA, at the end of the day, the county's still liable. So if there's a conflict for me, there's a conflict for Mick, et cetera. We've got to sort of address that in JPAs. We have, to a large extent, addressed that. There will be a groundwater attorney. Interviews are going to be happening. So when we get down into the stuff that really can be controversial, we're going to have an outside attorney voice. But for most of this other general stuff, we're right now working as 3 attorneys for the water district, the city, and I, and we work together to put these bylaws together. So while I generally understand the conflict concern, it doesn't bother me when you consider the fact that the public agencies up here are the ones actually liable for what happens at the GSA. Yeah. And beyond that, the decision on this was made before. So now moving on to, he has a comment about the audit in section 3.7. 3.7 actually does provide for an audit. That's what Government Code 6505 and 6505.5 require. So this agency's books will be audited. It's called for in the bylaws now. 5.6 PAC membership removal. We'd already talked about that earlier, so I won't go back into that. I think we've kind of, hit that on all points. Mrs. Merrick, telephone conferencing in the Brown Act. The meetings of this board will operate under the Brown Act. There is teleconferencing allowed under the Brown Act under limited rules and conditions. If we do have teleconferencing, those rules will be followed. You'll be able to show up here and hear the meeting. If, for example, Bob Page is in San Bernardino teleconferencing in, he will have to be in a public area in San Bernardino where somebody could be at. We did this just 6 weeks ago when we filed for our GSP. We had multiple hearings in multiple venues at the same time, all with access to this meeting room. Ms. Weston had a issue with the resolution. I can't really tell what went out on the web page cut out one section, but it did. Section 3 is cut out. Right? And it's not Section 3 entirely. It's just the top line, Section 3. So no idea how that happened, but nonetheless, it happened. I will add further, though, that the resolution has been amended a little bit to take care of Section 2 under the previous draft, which was floated around and not finalized when we got to agenda stage of getting this out on the board. It implicates that each member agency has to go back to its board and get verbal commitment that their agreement with these bylaws. That's not the case now. It's sort of same process sort of exists, but you do not have to go back. So, for example, if San Bernardino is fine with the bylaws and doesn't need its Board of Supervisors to approve them, San Bernardino does not in our new resolution, where in our old resolution it could be indicated that they needed to, or implied, I should say. Ms. Decker was claiming that there is sort of a conflict for the water district being on the PAC. I think I should point out at this stage that the water district, while they are on the PAC, they're a non-voting member of the PAC. So not sure if that answers her question, but the water district is on there. They are a user of water that needs to be addressed in this basin and are called for by SGMA. And we have counterbalances to that, which are the private pumpers aside from the water district. Mr. Neal brought up the attorney issue again. I think I've addressed it. He has also brought up the water resources manager position and who's the boss, and I think I've addressed that one. I think I've addressed everybody's issues.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. I want to clarify Mr. Haller's comments by building a little context. He made some policy, talked policy about it. He's a lawyer. He's not a policymaker. He got those ideas and those bringing the legal issues into the policy, but through the process we've gone through the past month of a ad hoc committee consisting of me and Mr. Brown and staff that have sat down and hammered out the legal framework to satisfy those policy issues so that the policy he discussed has been is being recommended by Mr. Brown and myself to this board for confirmation. Okay, who has questions? Go for it. Mr. Page.
Two things, or actually three things. The first is that Mr. Hall mentioned he made an answer regarding telephoning in. There actually is a reference to telephoning in to meetings under Section 2.6, which allows for the establishment of quorum if members of the board participate in a meeting telephonically, as provided in the Brown Act. So that, in addition to be allowed in the Brown Act, it's also specifically mentioned in the bylaws. The other question I had was, given the way that the resolution is written, that currently it's being presented, the revised version provides an opportunity for any member agency of the JPA to request that this be reconsidered at the next meeting. Is there a preferred method of communicating that?
Preferred would probably be at a staff level, and I don't want to speak for everybody on the staff that would deal with it, but the sooner we got whatever the issue was that would like to be addressed so that it could be worked on before the meeting would be the better.
Is there a specific date you need it by?
We can be flexible so you can have your meetings. I'm not sure when your meetings are. In fact, I think the Water District's meeting would probably be right up against this one. So,
yeah, our board met on Tuesday this week and doesn't have another scheduled meeting because of a NACO conference at the end of the month. Doesn't have another scheduled meeting until March 7th. Okay, and then the third thing I may have missed it, but one of the other things I heard, I don't know if Phil responded to this, was there was somebody pointed out that Section 5.2 indicates that each standing committee may establish a time and place for regular meetings, and then Section 5.5, specifically regarding the Policy Advisory Committee, has a sentence that says the boards shall establish the time and place for PAC meetings. Do you see that as a conflict or no?
Not for me, but maybe for somebody out there reading it who doesn't understand what we were writing. We have the PAC, we have the TAC, they're in these bylaws, but this board in the future may want to establish some other standing committee for some reason. And because that standing committee would be populated by this board, I think it's appropriate for that standing committee to set its own schedule. So we're trying to cover everything in there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Page. Thank you, Mr. Page. Who's next?
Do I understand that in order for my council to come back and look at let me ask this first. Are any changes coming from what was given today?
Not unless you vote for them today.
Some of the questions we asked required clarification or additional answers. Nothing that you said today will go into to a different version of the bylaws?
I don't think there's anything that we've answered today that need to be changed in the bylaws, but that would be up to you if you wanted us to rework some wording in these bylaws.
Because as it stands, if it comes back to my city council, the council will be given the direction that, yes, we approve these subsequent to in addition to council or any other agency having the ability to come back and say, we'd like to see some of these changes. Now, they just got it, some of the council members just got it on Monday, so they hadn't fully read it. I know that they had intended to think that it was coming back to them so they would have the opportunity. So I would then ask that you understand that we're going to come back potentially with maybe no comment, but I wanted to be able to have that opportunity.
That's what we've set up. We've set up a process where this board today adopts the bylaws. They only become formal at the end, formalized, adopted bylaws at the end of the March meeting, and that process is so that your board can meet and come back and ask for changes if you would like at the March meeting.
So there will be an agenda item on your agenda at the next March meeting to handle any of those things that have come between this meeting and that meeting. to make modifications if you so want to discuss that in a public setting. Does that make sense? It sounds like we're not getting to what you want or what you'd like to see.
I guess I want to make sure that you understand that if the same bylaws come back to the city council, they will not see anything different than what they saw on Mondays. What we got on Monday.
Can I take a crack?
Sure.
So based on the comments we heard tonight, legal staff's not recommending any changes to the bylaws apart from what you've already got in front of you. You guys could decide to change something today and we would change it and approve it with that change. But assuming that these bylaws are approved as presented, then they will be on for our city council meeting. I think it's March 1st.
It is.
And the way the resolution is written, Madam Mayor, if at that March 1st meeting, a majority of the city council directs us and says we don't like Section 3 or whatever, we don't like Section 5, then we will, after that meeting, upon receiving that direction, I'll notify Alan that we've got an issue. We need to put the bylaws back on for further review in the March meeting. If the way the resolution is written, if nobody gets in touch with Alan before we get the agenda prepared, then it's not going to be on. This decision will have been final.
You'll know from our meetings. And
I'll know, and on our meetings, I'm going to be there, and it's
Okay.
happening quicker than I'd like. So,
the day before our meeting, this next meeting. So, yes, thank you. Okay, I think I understand that.
A couple things. I know it's kind of dragging on for you guys and for me too, and for all of us really. So I want to revisit our meeting schedule. Maybe we need to meet more often, or maybe change our function a little bit. Water District, and everybody else has subcommittee meetings. So I'm trying to figure out how can we do that. I don't know the answer, but I would like to facilitate speeding things up. And it is kind of a tough deal because all of us have to answer to our boards. So I'm going to take this, and this says contingent upon. And so let's say we vote for these general bylaws, but then my board has a specific need. Well, that's going to be communicated, and then there'll have to be more discussion amongst us if it's substantial, or if it's just a misspelling or something rudimentary. That wouldn't be the case. So I don't know, just food for thought. Maybe there could be an admin exec. These would be standing committees, and they would be Brown Act, and everybody would be part of it. So that would be a good deal. I don't see I don't see the PAC or the TAC providing one answer. I see them providing possibilities. So there may be a consensus, but everything that I do, you give everybody all the options and let them choose. So I don't see it as being a single source, finite, done deal opinion from a committee. I just see it as a way to find more options and using everybody's thought process. So, and then for, like Longbottom stated, Commander, is that right? Commander Longbottom? It would be nice to see a little more detail on where we need to be when. And so let's say that these bylaws don't quite work. Well, that's going to put us into April. And so if it's the fact that we're only meeting once a month is really slowing us down, maybe we need to look at that a little differently. And I really would like to see very specifics, like the charter for this PAC with the names on there. It'd be nice to see where that's on a timeline. I don't know I know that we have things running parallel, but it'd be nice to see the logical sequence of how these things plug in, so everybody knows, and there's not a lot of thought like, well, where's this going to go from here? So it would also help me too. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, a couple of quick comments from me. Mr. Nugent, you asked about, and Mrs. Mead, you asked about small ag, big ag. Our county land use planner, Ms. Oviatt, did an assessment of the Indian Wells Valley and determined in her opinion that the difference between small and large ag is 60 acres. 61 acres being large, 60 and less being small. That's the county's perspective. That's not just GSA's perspective, but that's the county's perspective, definition of small and large ag. Can we talk afterwards, please? let's talk afterwards. I'll be glad. I do want to answer your question, but let's talk afterwards. What I see is, I understand that the definitions have, the lines have changed in naming specific companies to general categories. My understanding is that in order to properly empower the PAC, it's these categories, whether it's the business enterprises or the domestic well owners or small ag or large ag or whatever category it is, we want to empower all those people, not just the named persons who represent that people. So your job as Smith Construction to represent a business interest on the PAC is not just to represent the interests of Smith Business, but to represent the interests of the people in that category. So the issue was primarily about 2 ag, and the number 2 came up because primarily we have 2 large ag. I mean, that's about what it is, however this board defines it. So that's how we came up with the number, and that's why we feel that those applications are bit and piece to that designation. So, but we can always have changes to those definitions as we work through this issue. So I believe that the proper way of empowering the PAC is to make sure that the people who represent those categories do not represent individual interests, but the category itself. That empowers the PAC. And for us to stand here and say, you're this and you're that, it cuts the knees off from the public input to the definition and the public participation in the whole plan that we're trying to develop. So that's my thoughts on why that is the best way to go. So I think I'm done, and now I'm looking for any other comments or a vote on item number 7. Yes, sir.
I'd like to move adoption of the revised resolution, approving the bylaws contingent upon approval, or not approval, but contingent upon indication from the general member boards whether they want it to be reconsidered at the March meeting. And that would be my motion.
We have a motion.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. 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 All opposed. Motion passes. We go to item number 8. Report and plan of action milestones for a groundwater sustainability plan.
I'll be sitting in the place of Alan for a moment. I had to step out.
Okay.
So, on January 19th at meeting, your board directed for a plan of action and milestones to be developed. The Navy had suggested this, and the attached document is our first crack at that. I believe the Navy and Tim worked on this mostly. Now that Alan's back, I'll hand it back over to Alan.
Thank you. My apologies. Yes, we have a. Your board directed this, and so we've started to work on it. Some good work's been done by just contributions from everyone. It's not complete at this point, but we have some good material, and I want to thank everyone who has worked on it. Again, it's just for you to get input. Give us input if you like it. Great. We have sort of some sort of a timeline layout that we added to it as well, which I think is very good. Again, we want some feedback. In the interest of time, I'll end our
thank you
report.
Anybody in the public? Close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Can I kick off the conversation about this? This is why I think we need to get the PAC going right away, because this is one of the primary problems is establishing that timeline and get it going. So I'm very much interested in getting the PAC engaged as quickly as possible to manage this POA. Other thoughts? Yes, sir.
My expectation, I appreciate that staff put this together as an initial schedule. My expectation is that once we hire or contract for the water resources manager, that we could see some changes to this. I mean, I'm typically used to when you hire an engineering firm or consultant to work on a project, that they do develop something exactly like this and work with your team to modify it. So just want the board to realize I expect this is our first go at this, but I expect once we get that firm or that person on board that we may see some changes to this.
I would adjust. My thought is that we have 2.5 years.
Right.
It's taken us 2 years and 2 months to get here. We've got to move. And I'm very much interested in establishing quickly a relationship between the PAC and that person or that entity that's going to make those decisions. So I would like to see the PAC jump all over this, make adjustments that they feel are appropriate to this, and then hand that as a starting point to the water resources manager, so we can we'll be a little more ahead of the game.
On behalf of the Navy, I just want to say thank you. I mean, I think everyone can look at this and realize the magnitude of what lies in front of us.
Right.
And, there's quite the curve there on what needs to get done here the next 6 to 7 months to be able to get into the public comment and et cetera for the GSP. So one thing I think would be beneficial is if this is a standing item on our agenda here.
Good idea.
In the same fashion that we do a synopsis of the technical efforts, that we have here's the thumbtack on where we're at. Are we ahead? Are we behind? So that we can make kind of real-time decisions on whether we need to throw an additional meeting in or what we need to do to stay on track. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no other comments, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If you're in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 9, discussion action on a request for proposal for a water resources manager for the IWVGA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, there's been some discussion about this position. I think broader than a title, it has morphed, at least in title, but I think the concept is the same, that the water resources manager would be a consultant or consulting firm who assigns a person to shepherd the GSP and to work with any committees, PAC and TAC, help them be a liaison, a staff resource, and a liaison with the board. And we believe that this RFP is our first shot at that. It is. We'd like to. There will be more documents that we would send out, but we would like to. The recommendation is that we ask for your approval to get started on this process, because it does take several months to do that. There would be other documents that staff would provide any applicants, but the essence of it is this is the job description of the water resource and what we're looking for.
Thanks, sir. Any comments before we go to the public?
So based on your schedule, it's an RFQ that we're looking at, that we're going to submit first, looking for people that are capable and have time? Not an RFP, or am I confusing the issue?
Yeah, we get into a lot of semantics here. What some people call an RFQ, some people call an RFP, some people call RFQP. This one here really has a little bit of both. At first, we want to know their qualifications, and if you look down at the last,
to me, you're like interviewing consultants, and you get their bios.
You kind of are. The last part of this here, the very last paragraph, is shortly after we get their qualifications, assuming that they pass the first sniff test, they're going to be asked to send us in a proposal of what it will cost. So it's along the lines of an RFQP, maybe?
Okay, because I was just looking at your timeline, and it has an RFQ in March, and then it looks like by July they start doing something. So you do give yourself time to look for one. I'm just making sure that I want to move fast, but I want to have everybody in place and the process in place and these charters done before we introduce another person. Thank you.
Mr. Page.
Yeah, Chairman, I was wondering if we could get a little bit of clarification on one point. At our last meeting in January, staff brought us a recommendation along with a draft scope of work for Parker groundwater. And the recommendation at that point was that board direct staff to prepare agreement for Parker groundwater for consideration at the next meeting. We approved that recommendation after some discussion, and I had some questions as part of that discussion. And now, this agenda, there's not a specific contract with Parker Groundwater, but we do have an RFP or RFQ for searching for a water resources manager. The draft scope of work for Parker Groundwater last month could be interpreted potentially as either just being the person managing this position or being this position, so or this role. So I just wanted to clarify whether or not staff is presenting us this because now they believe, rather than doing an exclusive contract with Parker Groundwater, that we should instead be doing a competitive procurement and he could compete for that, or are they still two separate things and potentially there could be an exclusive contract for Mr. Parker to do specific things, just not this?
Boy, that
was my question too.
That's a multi-pronged question. We assumed and understood from the recommendation that was made at the last meeting that that was for Mr. Parker's services only, as it relates to what he's doing now, which is paid for by the county. So we did not assume that meant that that was an exclusive contract to do this water resources manager work. We are, with this action, recommending that it be a competitive process. No doubt Mr. Parker is eligible to apply, as are any others. There were some other prongs to it, Mr. Page. And let me go further than that. It may be the case that there are other things in addition to what a water resources manager does that could be performed by Mr. Parker, whether he was the successful candidate or not. So we have. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to know where we're going with that. So I think the essence of it is we think a competitive process is the way to go. I think that's wise to have an open, competitive process. So hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the clarification, because as I said last month when I asked the questions, it wasn't clear to me what that scope of work potentially could mean. The other point that I did bring up during that discussion last month was the issue of ensuring that however we go forward addresses the potential for conflict. And so I know that in this, what's been provided to us in terms of language that would be shared with potentially interested parties, there's no specific reference to addressing potential conflicts. And so I wasn't sure whether, Mr. Chairman, if staff intent would be to do something similar to what my agency does, which is to write a scope of work and request proposals with very specific instructions on what those proposals will include. But then we typically attach to the RFP our standard contract terms, which include provision regarding avoiding conflicts of interest. So I wasn't sure how the staff intended to ensure that those who would apply for this water resource manager position, that any potential conflicts get addressed. I don't know if if we're not going to, at this board, say that we're going to exclude anybody that already works for an interested party in this basin, say Searles Valley's or Mojave's consultants that are currently attending the cooperative group meetings. I just want to know how we're going to make sure we address the potential conflict issue, whether it's the water district's current consultant or anybody else. Would we disqualify people from applying, or how would we address that if we're not?
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
Those are really good questions. I appreciate that. My thoughts is that we need to compete for this job because we need to look at the universe of availability, see what's the best possible source. Mr. Parker has obviously demonstrated his talent and skills to this community time and time and time again. I can't imagine anybody doing better than what he has done. That all being said, I think that while we go out, or if we do approve this and we do go out for an RFP, that in the interim, I think we redefine Mr. Parker's scope and responsibilities to include the fact that he can do this job and get this whole thing airborne while we're waiting for the RFP to process to run its course. So I'm suggesting that not only do we compete for this job, get the best and get a look at the best talent, but also that we redefine Mr. Parker's responsibilities today or moving forward as quickly as we can to shape them and to make sure that the scope of responsibilities clearly articulates what he's doing for the GSA and what he's doing for the water district. And I think we can successfully navigate those conflict waters. The county is more than willing to reroute our funding for Mr. Parker through the GSA. So he would not be a county employee, he would be a GSA employee. We can redefine that scope of responsibilities within that context. Those are my thoughts. I think that answers your questions. Anyone else have thoughts?
I don't think I understand. Are we doing then just the one job? Because I had the same question that Bob did. Is it one job or two jobs?
Well, let me talk to you, because that's not really a legal issue. That's a policy issue.
Okay.
This is what I think. The legal framework that we approved, the bylaws, tentatively, articulates a general manager and articulates a water resources manager. I think there's ample justification to believe that there will be two employees required in order to, we might get the superhuman who can do both, but I think we need to have someone who's going to be able to coordinate, develop, and get the plan together with constant engagement with the PAC and the TAC. And then I think there has to be another person who's going to have to manage this 17-person gorilla and this TAC over here and get the communication flow between those two organizations, get those people on schedule, get them tasked, who's going to take the minutes, who's going to report out, who's going to communicate with other members of the TAC, who's going to be that independent person that can perform that function for us. Okay. At the same time, doing that, assuming responsibilities that Mrs. Christensen has been doing, which has been our acting. What is your job? Whatever you do.
Other duties is assigned.
I see that as I'm saying that not because I'm trying to create expense for us, but I just think if we're going to go do this, we need to do it properly, and we need to do it with the best possible talent. So I believe we must go out and review the public for their response. I believe that we need to engage Mr. Parker to the maximum extent possible, and there's plenty of things for him to do.
Is that based on the December approval? That's what I'm trying to get at. Maybe I didn't state it well, that what we approved to go out in December regarding Parker Consulting.
Peggy, could I try to restate that? Because I'm trying to figure it out myself. On our agenda, we have this RFQ or RFP as an agenda item for action. In the notes, it talks about consulting services to be agendized for this meeting. I'm happy to go ahead with the RFQ for a position. Maybe I missed it, but I don't see on the agenda anything about a contract for Mr. Parker. So I guess I would just suggest that we stick with what the agenda is asking us to do. And even though the meeting notes from last month ask that something come forward this month for Mr. Parker, it's not in our agenda. So I guess I feel more comfortable just sticking with what our agenda calls for.
Thank you, sir. I agree.
Thank you. Any other comments? Have we opened this to the public already?
Not yet.
Okay, let's open to the public. And let's see what you guys have to think. Or are you as tired as we are? Anthony's not tired.
Good afternoon, once again, into the afternoon. This is Anthony Brown with Aqualogic, and I just, through the chairman, would like to get some clarification on the question that Mr. Page asked. We have consultants who work for Mojave, myself. We have consultants that work for Meadowbrook. There are consultants historically that have worked for Seals Valley Mineral. Mr. Parker has worked for the Water District, has worked for the county. Are we all conflicted and cannot pursue the RFP, or is it open to us all? I haven't heard a clear answer to that yet.
That's a legal question.
I don't know that we can even answer the question without knowing what the actual conflicts are, because they may be more than just what you stated. We haven't asked the question of what defines a conflict. Generally speaking, I could say I don't know at this point. Help me out here.
Conflicts come in many forms and sizes. There are legal conflicts, 1090, FPPC issues, etc. They kind of set the floor where your conflicts are. Aside from that, if the board thought it was a conflict for somebody to have done significant work for somebody who's interested in what this GSP will come up with and affect them, that's a policy choice for this board. So there are some legal conflicts we would have to look at, and then there are some potential just policy conflicts.
So I still don't know.
Not the answer.
I think yeah.
But we're going out on the street with the RFP.
Yes.
That's not yet. We're getting ready to vote on that.
We hope so.
Yeah. I mean, what the answer I understood from the chairman was that you wanted to make this an open a competition. So let's see what we get.
Right.
And what I'm hearing from staff now is that let's see what we get, and then there may be some policy decisions for this board to make before we actually hire the consultant.
Thank you.
What's up, Board? Mike Neal. So just a observation here. I see now we're starting to talk about taking on personnel. The bureaucracy is going to start to burgeon here. I don't see anything attendant to facilities for these personnel and whether you're going to expect them to work out of their own offices, or whether this board is now going to have to start looking at getting a building or renting space from somebody else, or making some kind of collaborative agreements, and maybe they've got empty offices in City Hall here they can use, or so forth and so on. But they are going to have spaces to work out of. So, and I don't see that being addressed at the same time as they're talking about hiring people.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir. Okay, seeing no further public participation, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for comment, consideration, and a vote.
I'd be ready to make a motion if the discussion is done. So I'd make a motion that we go out as presented for an RFP for a water resources manager.
I would second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on. Item number 10, discussion direction to increase frequency of meetings.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I asked for this to be on the agenda, and after that I checked with city staff to see if there was space available on the first Wednesday and the first Thursday and the third Thursday like we meet now, and there is, except one time in November. So just if we don't choose to do that, I just wanted so you know the options.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we've had a lot of discussion about this internally. Let me say that it's laid out pretty well in the staff report. I don't want to go over that. The essence of the issue is we would prefer to work on things that can get done. And if another meeting would result, because it's very difficult to communicate, we're 5 different locations. We have to do phone calls. We have to schedule. It's just very hard. So we would spend a lot of that energy setting up for the next meeting, and we feel that our time, which is limited, most every staff person that works for an agency has another job to do. That we might be, well, in my case, I can say I can't promise you that you will get the best product given the responsibilities I have with the Board of Supervisors. I would say also that, so we're recommending that we not have additional meetings. I will say the last meeting was an aberration. We learned a little bit about presentations going long. It sounds like presentations are not the problem. It's just the nature of these meetings. But we had long presentations that went a good hour and a half into the meeting. I'm looking at folks and their eyes are glazing over, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you very much. It's not the public's fault that these meetings are going along. It's our fault. We need to be more economical. We need to be more precise. We need to create better agendas. We need to work across the board. I see a level of improvement. I'm thrilled about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing even more as we move forward. Thank you very much. Any other comments on this item?
I'll comment that I can't in good conscience vote for more meetings ever. Just as a principle. It's a principle. But I also want to say that I hope that as we move forward, we made two big decisions today. We're moving forward towards the PAC, which I hope will help the public have a voice that it doesn't have to have here necessarily, which should help our meetings. And then also just the RFQ or the RFP for a water manager. Both of those are big moves for this group, and will help us in our meeting management, and then also get us moving forward.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Page.
Yeah. I just wanted to agree with something that Alan said, which is as somebody who on my other job has responsibility over helping to manage the agenda process for getting things before the Board of Supervisors, I agree that the important thing is that we get more efficient with our time and continue to improve the information that's in the board items, but by just adding a second meeting, my fear would be the opposite would happen, that we would get less efficient and our board items would suffer.
I agree. Any other thoughts? So is there a motion required on this, or are we no motion? Closing comments. Moving on to
public.
Did I go to the public? Does the public care to have any comments about Freak having more meetings? Seeing none, it's closed. And we go to item number 11, closing comments. Anybody with closing comments?
I have a quick one.
Quick.
So I know why we're not talking, because we're all hungry now, so maybe that's a process. I had an idea for a future agenda item for Mr. Parker. What about if Tim is tasked with something that's for everybody? Let's say applying for Prop 1 grant funding and something like that. That to me is universally good for everybody. Right. So I would like to visit what else, or maybe in addition to. Something specific like that, because to me, the sooner you apply for a grant, the better your odds are getting it, and especially if you have somebody who knows the ropes. So I'd like to look towards that. What else can Tim do? Tim can tell us what he can do. I know he can stand on his head sometimes, but I think something like that couldn't possibly be a conflict of applying for a grant. So I like that idea.
Thank you, sir. My closing thoughts are we got so much stuff to do. I'm looking forward to having the PAC designated as quickly as possible. I agree with Mr. Brown last meeting that we got to get them going. They can start building work schedules. We should have one of those prepared initially for the next month so we can give them a work schedule, a detailed item of what we want them to do. Outreach program, local, state, the federal government, the Navy, how are we going to engage all those entities and get them involved personally with our situation here. And there's several other things that the import program, what are we doing? It's just lying flat. We need to get the PAC engaged in how we're going to review that program. So there's a lot of stuff to do. I'm looking forward to it. And I have no more comments. Anybody else? Thank you all. Thank you all for another 3.5 hours. I really do appreciate it. We're done.